Greetings and salutations, everyone, for this second installment on the discussion between Doctors Costa and Doctors Petrovich on the world's oldest alphabet and the dating of the Exodus. If you didn't watch the first video or the first installment on this, please, I encourage you to do so. But if you choose not to, I'll go ahead and give a recap. So in the first video, Dr. Petrovich introduces his book, in which he tries to prove that Hebrew is the oldest alphabet. He goes through, he discusses how ancient Semitic languages work as far as it's just the consonants, and since you were a native speaker of these languages, you understood where the vowels were, and it wasn't problematic. Well, it is for us today, which is why it can be sometimes really difficult to read some of these scripts because they just don't have vowels, and some of these words look something similar, so to speak. They have three root letters. Most Semitic languages, at least the Northwest Semitic languages, have three root letters, along with Akkadian. They have three root letters, and that's how the word is made up. So, yeah, that's basically how Semitic languages work, at least at the base level as far as how words are formed. And then you get into the grammar and everything, so on and so forth. So here, we're just going to start the discussion. We're going to continue the discussion here in a minute. But here he's talking about how became the Hebrew alphabet, or the alphabet is the world's oldest. But before I do, I would also like to apologize for my mistake that I made in the first video when I said that Sumerian was an Indo-European language. It is not an Indo-European language. However, my point though was that it is certainly not a Northwest Semitic language. It might be a language, I think, if I remember correctly, Sumerian is a language in isolation. Theoretically, but I'm not sure on that either because I'm not a Sumeriologist. So, without further ado here, we're going to continue the discussion, and we're just going to drop right into Petrovich here, talking about the Proto-Hebrew script, if you will, which doesn't really exist among scholars. And then shortly after that, we'll probably get into an article written by Colston, Dr. Colston of George Washington University. And his article published in I think it's the BAR, the Biblical Archaeological Review. Again, I'm not sure, but we'll find out here in a second in what journal it was actually published. And how early alphabetic scripts evolved throughout the second millennium. So without further ado here, we're just going to plop down. Petrovich is speaking, and to give you some sort of context here, he's going through each of the projected Proto-Hebrew original letters, what they looked like way back when in the second millennium, then in Middle Egyptian, which is roughly the 18th, 17th centuries, then the original Hebrew alphabetic name. Again, I'm going to put all these in quotes because honestly, it's just conjecture and speculation at this point. So then you get the Hebrew consonantals of the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and then eventually the IA, or the Iron Age. So without further ado, here is Petrovich giving a defense of his thesis and his book.
One, that's how it's written in modern Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And then the English word that's connected to the pictograph, and then the Hebrew writing of it.
Right.
So a bayit is the word for a house in what we call absolute form as opposed to construct form. So it's right. House, whereas the word bait would be house of. So house, and there's your house here.
Right.
So this column is how they wrote it in actual inscriptions that date mainly to the lifetime of Joseph, and in a few cases just a little bit after the lifetime of Joseph. So that's the 12th dynasty,
right?
And that's the Middle Kingdom. And then this next to last column is how they wrote it in Moses' day. This is the New Kingdom. So if you want to know, gee, how were the 10 Commandments actually written? This is your column, because every letter is represented. In a few cases, like here, we don't have in the modern correspondence is a Tate letter. We don't have an early form of the Tate letter. We don't know how it was originally written.
Right.
We don't have attestation of it. We don't have an example of it. But we have an example of it in Moses' day. And so in Sinai 351 and in Sinai 357, they wrote it this way, probably earlier, based on this hieroglyph, which they first would have written exactly like this.
Mm-hmm.
So this written form in Sinai 112, and this is actually a hieroglyph, as what I try to prove in both of my books, as Manasseh actually wrote this hieroglyph.
And again, that's just sheer speculation on that, if Manasseh wrote it, or if that's even how Manasseh wrote it. The glyph there in question is F35, of course. If you use JSesh when you're writing your glyphs, your hieroglyphs, your hieroglyphics, and it simply means good. Nefer means good, which is the Tov there for good. But you can see it looks nothing. There's nothing there for Tov as far as it's related for the Tet. I'm sorry, the letter Tet. It doesn't resemble any shape or form, and even when you get down there, it's so just to start, yeah, that's Nefer. It's the Egyptian word for Nefer, and even etymologically, it doesn't really quite sound like Tov. Like, it's a completely, all it is, Nefer, is a transliteration of the Hebrew word there for Tov, which both of them mean good. That's it. There's nothing else to look at that. They're just translations. Now, you can study the history of each of the words, the etymological history of Nefer, which is theoretically how we would pronounce it in ancient Egyptian, based off of the Coptic. I don't have time to go into it, but ancient Egyptian, our theory on how the language may have sound comes from the Coptic language, which is nothing more than a liturgical language today. It's spoken outside of the church, I should say. But for most purposes, it's just a liturgical language, but in Egypt. So we use the sounds of the Coptic language, and it helped us to reconstruct ancient Egyptian. So theoretically, this should be Nefer. But that's all it is. The words are different. There's even debate. I think there's debate on Egyptian, it even being a Semitic language, but I'm not sure. Again, don't quote me on that. But anyway, I'll let him digress here.
Mm-hmm.
So this appeared in Sinai 351, and then they decided to simplify this. So they took this left part of it, that's like a plus sign, and they just wrote the plus sign. They took the circle and they circled around that plus sign. And now we have a new way of writing this letter. And therefore, that form shows up in our last column, which is how letters were written during the period of the judges and the period of the monarchy, the Israelite monarchy and the Judite monarchy. So 1200 BC, 1100, 1000, 900, 800, 700, 600, all the way down to 587 BC.
And again, that's sheer conjecture, and that I don't even know how to respond to this. It's conjecture, and it's very, very extremely unlikely here that it would date to 587 BC when we have texts that don't look like that at all, especially in the Old Testament. At least judging on the Dead Sea Scrolls, I should say, and how they were written.
Mm-hmm.
This is how the letters were written. So, does that make sense?
Sure does.
Okay. And then this is basically the end of the alphabet. We won't go through all of this. But my chart gives you the opportunity not to just look at the columns, but to look at rows and say, well, how is a certain letter, let me pick one here, maybe this one, the letter Pei. How is letter Pei, which means mouth in Hebrew?
Now, before he goes on here, let me just explain that in the square script, this is Pei. He's absolutely right. This is the Hebrew letter for Pei, and it makes a P sound. However, you get over to the Egyptian, which means mouth here. It has two meanings that I am aware of. One, if you put a stroke underneath the mouth, it means mouth, or it means mouth. It's pronounced R. It can also be a preposition for which means, I think it means to or towards. My Egyptian's a bit rusty. I think I've mentioned that in the past. But it means to. It can either be a preposition or it can mean the noun mouth. So depending on context, you'll know. And you can tell that it is not really related, judging by theoretical reconstructed ancient Egyptian pronunciation based off the Coptic, that it is not really related to the Hebrew word for pay, which means mouth, which is the Semitic or the Northwest Semitic common word for mouth. It can also mean entrance. But anyway.
There's our meaning. How was it written after it first looks like a mouth? And you can kind of figure out that's a mouth, yeah.
Right.
In contrast to an I, which is the A letter.
Or
so
Ray in
early
Egyptian
on, it's
is the
written
word
like
for
this.
I.
You can see here the line between. Isn't that pretty? They make it like lips, a lower lip and an upper lip.
Right.
Then it's written this way, similarly in Moses' day. So that's Joseph's day. That's Moses' day. And then, Tony, here's what they do. They take the mouth and they say, we don't need to write all of this. Let's cut off most of it and stop right here. We're just going to write that corner and that corner. And here we have it right here. Boom, boom. There it is.
Right.
Just the corner of the mouth. And so from then on, the P sound is written with a horizontal line and then kind of this wedge under stroke here to turn it into a corner of a mouth. So that just shows you over time the letters, if you don't mind the term, they evolved, they changed, they adapted. Why? It's really easy. It's called simplicity. We don't want to have to keep writing everything so pictographic. Like here, this is a fish, right? This letter is a fish. Oh boy, that's a lot to draw. I don't draw fish very well. So it basically simplifies to this, but then it goes out of use because
you notice he's going over the Hebrew word or the letter for Samic, the S sound. This is it in Egyptian, and here it's a fish, and it looks nothing like this. Looks nothing like this. Is my point.
With this letter, there were actually two competing options.
Right.
The fish and this hare. Well, the hare is easier to draw, so because the fish is so complex. So simplicity's sake weighs in, and we just write the hare. But as you go along in time, things simplify, right? So that's kind of how it works. Now let's look at two inscriptions.
Okay, here's where he starts talking about the Sinai inscriptions, the various ones. I think it goes over two, and we'll go into it, and then I will bring up the Halit and these other languages like Ugaritic and Akkadian I have on hand right now. Unfortunately, I also have two physical copies of books. We're going to be sharing Dr. Falk's book. Tonight we're going to be sharing Dr. Falk's book, The Ark of the Covenant. Yeah, The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian context, an illustrated journey. And we are going to use... Sorry, I just wanted to get the title correct. And we're going to use what I like to call the Little Blue Book. It's called a Concise Dictionary of Akkadian. And then we're going to use... I couldn't find Hunegard's Ugaritic grammar book on time. I see it actually now, but I'm not going to get it. But I did find the basics of ancient Ugaritic online on my computer. So I'll bring that up and we'll go through some of the words here in these three languages, Hebrew, Ugaritic, and Akkadian. And we will, it's my attempt to show you common Semitic words or throughout Semitic languages, especially Northwest Semitic languages. Of course, I know Akkadian is not Northwest. It is, in fact, Eastern Semitic. But we're going to go through them, with like 3 or 4 words, I guess, that are common Semitic words throughout, just common Semitic words. So I'll let him continue here.
And then we'll kind of be done with this question of, what is the language behind the oldest alphabetic script that I'm trying to prove in my book, The World's Oldest Alphabet, is Hebrew. So there's an inscription that dates to about 1772 BC, and we can date it because it has a date inscribed on it. It's a date in Middle Egyptian. And this is what scholars call Sinai 376, and it was composed at a site called Wadi Nasib, which is in Sinai. It's in the southwestern part of the Sinai Peninsula. So Sinai 376, again, Dynasty 13 is just a little time after the lifetime of Joseph. Joseph dies a few years before the end of Dynasty 12. So in Dynasty 13, we have this inscription. Here it is from a book published by a German scholar named Gerster, published in the 60s, I think 1962 or so. It's in my book. And you can see these letters here that are part of this rock-cut, rock-inscribed inscription. So what is he writing here? Well, what I had to do is I had to eliminate all the false friends like this. This is what we call a false friend. This is a line in the stone that's not part of an inscription. So that's not a legitimate stroke, part of a letter.
Right.
But this is. And this is. All of these other things. So I have to determine all that. I write it all in. So I use, I do it electronically, and I use magnification in PowerPoint up to 400% in size. So it becomes massive in size on your screen in front of you. And then I'm able to write very carefully what is that letter. And then I can use edit points to correct my mistakes when I first draw it. So I can constantly improve my work, which is nice. So then I remove the picture and I'm left with the letters of the inscription. And one thing interesting about this, Tony, when I went through this process and tried to decipher this inscription, this letter was not a letter that other scholars were identifying as a letter that's part of the inscription. None of the other scholars identified it. But the problem is, once I knew the script and I knew the alphabet, and I knew that you couldn't make anything logically out of these 4 letters to start 1 or 2 words, I knew that we had a problem. Houston, we have a problem. So I went back to the inscription. I looked really carefully. And you know what I realized? Oh, my goodness. There's a letter here that nobody found. And it makes sense, too, because look at the height of where these lines start, right?
Right.
This starting point is much more in keeping with these, isn't it?
Yes.
It's between, this one and this one. But this is way down. Why would you start? And this is the first line of the inscription because it's vertical. So this is the first column, second column, third, fourth, and fifth. And Tony, by the way, this letter was never recognized either. But when I realized you can't have a 1-letter word, so I went back to the inscription and said, there's something missing. Is it down here? No, it's not down here. And that kind of makes sense because things kind of stop here. So I looked up here, and sure enough, very lightly preserved is a letter that's the Y letter. So I knew, again, scholars miss this letter too. So that's all part of the process of discovery. That's a thrill. So when you then try to decipher this, here's what I come up with. And this is my first word. The red here is a break. So that's indicating a break in the first word, and now we're starting the second word, and the third.
But my question is, how does he know that's a break? How does he know that's a break? How does he know that, for example, this is a bait with the square? I know we went over it in the previous slide, but it's just really, really, something's fishy going on here. That's all I've got to say. Something fishy is going on here.
Third word starts here. And again, we just keep going this way. So what does it all end up with? Here it is. The house of the vineyard of Asnath. And then this is what we call a conjunction. It's a wow conjunction.
Wow conjunction, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop him here too, because the word for bait, you see bait here, it's in the what we would call the construct state or the possessive state. So it's bait, so it would be house of. It would be house of. And he's got kedem here, which means vineyard, house of the vineyard. Okay, allegedly, this is what based on his translation. But the problem is that it's a bait and a tav, and there's no yod. There should be a yod here, and there's no yod. No yod. So that's a bit problematic already right there.
And, or whatever, depending on context. So the house of the vineyard of Asnath, and here we have its innermost room have come to life. I'm sorry. And the innermost room have come to life. Wait. And so there. Oh, the room and innermost have come to life. Right there.
And a thing there on the verb chaya there at the bottom, come to life, is that it doesn't mean come to life. It just means to be or to exist. In an Egyptian, that would be cheper. Now, cheper has the additional meaning for to come to existence, but chaya doesn't. Chaya just means to be or to exist or to happen. If we look here at, let me see if I can find it here. We'll bring up the good old Hallet right here, and we will look this up ourselves. Haya. So it's got the hey, the yod, and the hey. Daleth. Trying to look it up here really fast. There it is. Here's the word haya. It means to happen or to occur. To be or become. Can be to be with someone used with the preposition, and so on and so forth. To be again in the nifal. So, and that's it. It does not mean to come to life. He's just wrong on his translation of the verb. So, yeah, that's problematic there. He has to say that. He has to do that so it fits his narrative here as well. I should warn you guys that in about 5 or 10 minutes, I can't stop it since I've started, but one of my alarms is going to go off for one of my kids. So if we could just ignore it if I'm speaking or he's speaking, don't worry about it. It'll be done, and that's it. So just be warned. It's going to warn him to wear his eye patch. So I'm just going to... we're just going to talk over it. So...
This letter and this letter. Mm-hmm. So there it is. That's the inscription. Now, what does this mean? Well, there was a house in the vineyard. What does that mean? Well, I lived in Russia for 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. Russians had what they called a dacha. It's a summer garden. So they'd go to their summer garden, they'd grow some vegetables usually. And they would have this little, what I would call a shack. And they'd live in their little shack or, overnight in many cases. And sometimes, just stay in it during the day and then go home at night. But that house then allowed them to monitor what was going on. It protected their garden from people and from animals and other kinds of intruders, and allowed them to be Johnny on the spot in case there's a problem with the weather. They need to resolve something. So it's kind of like that in the ancient world. So there's this vineyard, and there was a house, like a dacha house, and that house protected the vineyard and allowed a person to work as a vintner there, to tend the vineyard so that the grapes grow well.
Right.
Well, this is the house of the vineyard of Asnath. Well, who's Asnath? Mm-hmm. That's an easy one. There's only one person in the entire Hebrew Bible whose name is Asnath. It's the wife of Joseph.
Right.
But Joseph died about, almost 30 years, or a little over 30 years earlier. Right? Joseph died 30 years earlier.
And he's using this according to the early date of the Exodus. So this is not in alignment with the late date Exodus at all. I just want to state that. So,
and he was 120 years old, if memory serves.
Right.
So probably Asnath is not alive at this point. So this then becomes a house that's built in the midst of this vineyard that's named after Asnath posthumously after her death.
Right.
And that makes sense because she's the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh. And I try to prove in my second book that the site where the Israelites live here not in Sinai, but in Egypt, it was settled in the second occupational phase. Jacob lived there first with his sons, but in the second occupational phase, it was run by a mayor with a title, the equivalent of mayor, and that was Joseph's second eldest son, Ephraim, yeah. So the house of the vineyard of Asnath, and its innermost room were, and then here is were or have come to life.
Which again, I've already proven according to the Hallett. I wanted to bring the driver and Briggs, but it's too late now. That is not what the word means. Haya does not mean come to life. Does not mean come to life. So
I'm sorry. The house of the vineyard of Osnath and its innermost room were engraved. That's the verb that's here. We're engraved. Right. And that is a parallel to what we read about of the first temple, which we call the Solomonic Temple, because that building is...
Speculations built on speculation, built on speculation. His foundation for the whole of his argument is faulty. And that's clear to be seen here, especially when he's going through Sinai 376. We'll see it again when he goes through, I think it's 375. Sinai Inscription 375. And I'll let Dr. Falk here in his book, at least this page here, explain what Sinai Inscription 375a actually says. It's a bilingual inscription. So,
known as a beit, house of, or bait, house. And that same word is used of Osnath's, the house that was built for Osnath's vineyard. That's the word.
Because it's in a construct state. It's in the possessive state. House of. There's only one way to do that in Hebrew. It's bait. And then you put the absolute noun after it. So bait would be in the construct state, like he said. And then the absolute state, or the absolute noun, the noun would be in the absolute state. Aramaic works along the same lines. There's a construct state, and then there's an absolute state. And there's also a determinative state, but that's irrelevant in Aramaic, according to with our studies here. So, anyway.
Bait.
Right.
And then we have this word, devir. It's the word used of an innermost room. In archaeological terms, we use the word cella.
Yeah.
Well, in the Bible's terms, like of the first temple, we use, for the innermost room, we use the Holy of Holies. That is the most holy sanctuary. So that same word that's used of the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, where God resided inside there, that's used in this inscription as the innermost room of the house, which means you probably have a 3-room house or a 4-room house with that kind of architectural plan, and there's an innermost room just like you have with the temple. So you have this amazing parallel between this house in the vineyard in 1772 BC and the temple that's built in the 900s BC. Fascinating parallel.
It is.
And then the word engrave, and this verb here, kala, the verb is used for the engraving that took place. So somebody's carving something for a purpose. What purpose? To beautify the house that's in the vineyard of Osnath, right? Well, that same word is used of how Solomon, he did that with same verb. He carved all of the temple's walls with, and here's the nominal form of the same word. So the verb and the noun are what we call cognates.
Right.
They're exactly the same as one another. He carved all the temple's walls with what? Engravings or carvings, if you want. We can do that in English. Carvings of what? Cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. So this is amazing. You have the same vocabulary or technical terminology for this house as you do with the house of God. So, Tony, how is this not Hebrew?
Yeah. No, I could see it. It's definitely Hebrew.
Yeah. And no other ancient Semitic language uses the word Osnath as a personal name.
Right.
As the name of a person. So, and then we'll come to the final inscription I wanted to share with you, which is Sinai 361. This is a big one, important one. And I'm dating it to somewhere, it's either 1447 or 1446 BC. I don't have anything to base that on as far as something inscribed on the actual stone.
Okay, since he does 361 here, I'll spare you the Falk's book, unfortunately, since he doesn't go into Sinai 375a there. He has it listed, but he actually won't go into it. He'll go into 361 instead. And I think here is the point where I'm going to try and share some of the commonalities or similarities between the Northwest Semitic languages, with the exception of Akkadian, which is indeed East Semitic. So, anyway, I'll let him continue here.
It's inferred based on the inscription itself, the meaning of the text. I'm
Right.
dating that, just to be clear. But I'm confident nonetheless. Whether right or wrong, I'm confident. This is found at Serbit Yochadim. This is a turquoise mining site also in Sinai, where the Israelites would join an Egyptian team. They would go down and extract turquoise from the mines, and then they would, clean it all off and, reduce it to the actual fine stone itself, and then they would take it back with them and then sell them on the market and
Right.
make a lot of money. It became a lucrative industry. So, Sinai 361. Here's the stone. This is from the originally from.
Notice down there at the bottom of the screen how it reads Romain Boutin, the Proto-Synatic Inscription. Scholars usually will use Proto-Synatic Inscription or Early Alphabetic Inscription. I actually prefer Colston's Proto-Synatic Inscription, and I'll share his article here in a few minutes, probably after I do with the languages, because I want him to get through these inscriptions first, and then I'll go into a somewhat lengthy discussion with the languages, and then Colston's article to sum up, or to shed more light, I should say.
From the mine, but it ended up in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Last I heard, when one scholar went to find it there, they couldn't find it. The Egyptians couldn't find it in their inventory, which is absolutely, raises the hair on your arm if you're
Sure.
an epigrapher.
Sure.
Who works on ancient inscriptions. But that's, the way it goes. So you can see there's writing here, and once again, they're in columns, not in rows.
Right.
And how do we know that this piece is part of the overall inscription? Well, here you have it. There's your answer. Right on this one, the edge of this one and the edge of this one, you have a similar etching. Again, call it part of a false friend. It's not a letter, but it's an etching, whether it's naturally made or a person made it. And then we have this one, a second one next to it, and that's copied here. I should say continued here. So it shows you that this stone originally was together here, not broken off.
Right.
But in more modern times, that part's broken off. So I do my drawing, I remove my picture, and there's the inscription. It's interesting, Tony. You see these two fragments of letters here?
It's
Yep.
just
And
sheer speculation down there in the right-hand corner with this. How does he know? This one I could see because it looks like the N, like the water symbol for an Egyptian. And then, yep, here we go. So we're just going to talk over it. So, and then this right here is the R. Right here, this is the R, he allegedly says. And that's nothing more than speculation, in my opinion. Because he has to finish 75% of it. So we're not really sure what this symbol is, or this one, for that matter, because there's so little of it. It's ridiculous. So
I've superimposed my suggested continuation of these letters here and here, right? All of this.
Yeah.
But no, until I came along, people were saying, well, these are parts of letters, but they're really small letters, and they're part of this column here, the second column.
Right.
Once I realized, none of the letters in this region are so small that they should be, ending here or here. They should be big like this. So
Right.
I stretched them out, and then I realized, oh my, these two letters are not part of this column, because look at all that space there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that's like an ugly gap between two middle teeth. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So, but with the third column, if you continue from the snake letter, which makes the N sound,
Yeah.
because Nachash is the
I will have you note that the snake there, that's probably a viper. It looks more Egyptian, if anything. I could be wrong, but I'm just saying, to my eyes, those two, that one right there that he circled, looks more like a viper, which is the third MS if you go by Egyptian language. It's the third masculine singular a personal pronoun for he. Now, it could be attached. That could be a word. I really haven't studied. I should say I haven't studied it. It's just I really don't focus on early alphabetic inscriptions. But since he's saying that this is the world's oldest alphabet, Hebrew, I can confidently tell you this isn't, being an expert and a scholar on Hebrew itself. So, and my case here is not defending, is actually spotting where he's wrong here in his argument, saying this is the oldest Hebrew alphabet. So, if anything, that looks more like the Viper for the 3ms, the third person masculine singular. But that could also be, if that's Egyptian, it could also be part of a word. It could just be the letter in a word for F. It could be, yeah. So I just want to make that clear that this, no way that looks like a nun. That was probably the longest way I've ever said that no way could be the nun.
Hebrew word for snake, one of the Hebrew words. All of a sudden you realize, oh no, these are 2 letters that continue this column. So I was the first person to come along and say, whatever these letters were, they're part of this column. And I'm very confident that this is the, this is
that's a pay. That'd be the pay there, and then followed by a lamp.
Yeah, it's either a pay or an aleph. I'm sorry, a pay or an ayin without an eyeball. So it could be an eye without an eyeball. Yeah. And this is the shepherd's crook that makes the l, the l sound.
Right.
From the verb lamad, which means to teach or to learn. So a shepherd's crook or shepherd's staff was used to spank a child or prod an animal to say, no, don't go near the ravine, little sheep.
Yeah.
So you use that tool to teach the sheep, or from the sheep's perspective, it's a tool used for learning. So the same word is used of learning or teaching. So anyway, that's this column and that's this column. So once we fill in all of the wording, figure it all out.
So before he goes on here, wait. No, he hasn't said
weeks
it yet.
to do. Breaking down the words. All of a sudden, it was one of these inscriptions, Tony, that just blew my mind because of these 2 letters right here. This is a ma from the Hebrew word mayim, which means water. So water starts with a m sound.
Okay.
Their word mayim.
Yeah.
It's a wave of water. And
now, this being an early alphabetic inscription, as most scholars would argue, this is what I'm going to say about this inscription. He goes, this is the word mayim. That looks like the Egyptian letter for N. And if you get 3 of these, one on top of the other, it becomes the word mu, which is water. Okay? Now, he's saying water in Hebrew is mayim, and he's absolutely correct. But the problem is with these early alphabetic inscriptions is this. We bring up Logos here. We're going to go into Ugaritic here. And this is the word for water in Ugaritic. Mayu. Mayim, Mayu. Same. You get the M and the Y. So, and the Aleph here. It's an U Aleph in Ugaritic. Ugaritic has 3 Alephs. The U, the A, and the I think. So you get those. But Mayu is the word for water, and it's Mu in Egyptian. It's Mayim in Hebrew. Nothing more than a common Semitic root is what we would call this. Ugaritic has the same common root. You get down to, another example is Malku, MLK. MLK is the root letter for to rule or to be king. Melech in Hebrew, Malku in Ugaritic. We go further. Messenger, MLK for messenger. It's the same root, by the way, for king, but it's Malak in Hebrew for messenger, and it's Malaku, messenger in Ugaritic. And furthermore here, I can't quite bring it up on the computer here, but again, this is the Concise Dictionary of Akkadian, the second printing. It's the blue book. I'll show it right here. Sorry. Right there. It looks like this. I just want to read from it here a couple of dictionary entries for something similar. In Akkadian, it's malakum, which means messenger. And in, if we go down further or up, you get Malaku, which means to rule. Now, that is my point, is that these could be anything as far as scripts are concerned. Now, what I'd like to read to you before he goes on here is the, yes, here we go. And then exit out of that one for a little bit. And we're going to bring up, this is Colston's article in the Biblical Archaeological Review on the oldest Hebrew inscription. He's got 4 contenders for the oldest Hebrew inscription. There's the title page. And this is the inscription that refers to Saul's or David's kingdom. But right there's the 4 contenders. But that's not my concern here. My concern here is reading, yes, here we go. We're going to start right down here at the bottom left-hand side of page 34 of his article. And again, this is by Dr. Christopher Rolston of the George Washington University. And this is what he has to say on these early alphabetic inscriptions. I'll start here at the top here. He says, script and language are 2 very different things. This is an important point that is often forgotten in debates about inscriptions. For example, the alphabet used to write most Western European languages is the Latin alphabet. Thus, the sentence rien ne l'intéresse means nothing interests him is written in the French language, but the script is Latin. Similarly, the words net muut, that is, those who are dead, forgive me if you speak Coptic here, are in the Coptic language, but the script is Greek. This same phenomenon is attested in the ancient languages grouped together as Northwest Semitic. For example, and I'm going to butcher my Arabic here, forgive me, the well-known Tel Fakhariya statue inscription found in Syria in 1979 is written in a rather majestic Phoenician script, but the language of the inscription is Aramaic, not Phoenician. So he says that, and we can go down further here on early alphabetic inscriptions, and we get, moreover, and we're just going to go now, he's going to start talking about the advancement and the evolution, if you will, of early alphabetic inscriptions beginning in the early 2nd millennium BC. So he goes on here and he says, at the end of the 2nd millennium BCE, several seminal developments occurred. 1, the stance of the letters became more stabilized and standardized. 2, the direction of writing became consistently right to left. Before, it was left to right. It could have been written left to right, right to left, or written as the ox plows, which was left to right, then down, right to left, and then down, left to right. So they could have been written. So by the end of the 2nd millennium BCE, the scripts became standardized and everything stabilized. So continuing here, thirdly, because of a number of consonant mergers, among other things, the number of consonantal letters was reduced to 22 by the end of the 2nd millennium. So that means that the scripts that Petrovich is showing here in his conversation with Costa had more letters, because they date to, as he's even shown, those inscriptions date to the 2nd millennium, mid-2nd millennium, or early 2nd millennium BCE. So that's problematic for his argument. Because of these developments, though, he digresses, the convention within the field of epigraphy is to refer to this next stage of the Northwest Semitic script as Phoenician. So he's saying that you get the early alphabetic inscription, then the next one in line, the next in the development is the Phoenician or Phoenician script. So the changes from early alphabetic occurred gradually, but by around mid-11th century BCE, these changes were in place. The Phoenician script is the heir of the early alphabetic script. And this Phoenician script is the mother script of the Old Hebrew script. That is the Old Hebrew script derived directly from the Phoenician script. The Old Hebrew script did not derive directly from the early alphabetic script, much to the chagrin of Dr. Petrovich here. That is the crux on which arguments are based against Petrovich's claim here. And it's utterly ridiculous to think Hebrew existed that so far back in the second millennium, when the oldest textual evidence that we have of biblical Hebrew, of ancient Hebrew, dates to the 9th or 10th century. I will give you this, though. He does say here in the following paragraph, the Old Hebrew language, however, certainly existed prior to the 9th century. It's just that we have texts written in the Old Hebrew language prior to the 9th century would have been written in the Phoenician script, the mother script of Old Hebrew, and clearly, and then he continues, and then he goes, we actually have texts in the Old Hebrew language that very probably antedate the 9th century. Probably, not 100% sure, but probably. But they are found in the Hebrew Bible, not in ancient inscriptions that have been recovered from the ground. He lists some old inscriptions like the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, the blessing of Moses in Deuteronomy 33, and Jacob's prophecy in Genesis 49. And scholars generally agree that these poetic texts date to the 12th or 11th centuries BCE. So, what we have here with this inscription here, Sinai 361, and the previous one that he showed, these are early alphabetic inscriptions, which means there were probably more letters because these date to the middle of the second millennium BC or older. The scripts hadn't been standardized like they were when you get to the 12th century BC, so it's possible that the oldest parts of the Pentateuch and Judges 5 were written in the Phoenician script, not in this, which is the early alphabetic inscription. That is the crux of my argument here against Petrovich in this discussion. So I will let him continue here for a little bit, and then we'll stop again.
We kind of go, PG-13 or R rating here. This is breasts, as in women's breasts.
Yeah.
Shadayim.
Yes.
So it's a M and a Sh.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, oh my, that could be making the word Moshe, which is the Hebrew word for, Moses. And I said...
And again here, that's not how words work. It's either the word for breast or it's the word Moses. Funny though, here when he says you see the meme and the sheen here, you don't see the hey. And clearly in Hebrew the name was Moshe. Now of course it came from the Egyptian mes, and there's debate about all that. There's a debate about the verb mes, but we won't get into that here.
No. It can't be Moses. It can't be. It's too good to be true, right? That's what everybody tells you. Something like that would be too good to be true. So I tried every option known to man grammatically to make some other word out of this with what follows in the context of what comes before and what follows. And you know what, Tony? I realized that this has to be a noun. It can't be a verb, can't be an adverb, can't be an adjective. It has to be a noun. And the only thing that fits in the context is a name, and that name is Moshe. And there happens to be only one name.
But there's a hey from Moshe. Even in the Pentateuch, there's always a hey. Now, it could have been updated, I understand, over the centuries. It could have been updated. But he's reading way too much in. He basically sees what he wants to see here.
Remember one person in the Hebrew Bible who's ever called Moshe.
Right.
And that's Moses, the one whom God called to lead the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt. And it just so happens that this inscription is around other inscriptions that date to the middle of the 15th century BC, which is the right time of the Exodus. And so it makes perfect sense if this is Moses. So
and
what
if
it
that's
reads,
the case, Douglas, if that's the case, then what this is this would be the first extra biblical document or artifact that contains the name of Moses.
yeah, exactly. And nothing else comes close in age, Tony. That's the heart-stopping significance, isn't it?
Wow.
So the reading is, our bound servitude had lingered. Moses then provoked astonishment. It is a year of astonishment because of the lady. What does this mean? Our bound servitude had lingered. We continue to be slaves. That's as simple as it is.
Right.
And that makes sense because the beginning of Exodus seems to imply this time period that continues. And what shows that it can...
So much no. There's just so much no in that. This is clearly an early alphabetic inscription dating to the middle of the second millennium, or early, no later than, the middle of the second millennium BC. He's got the date 1446 in Dynasty 18. And this is at Serbet el Khadim, which was a turquoise mining area. He's got that right. But to so quickly label this the Hebrew language is utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous when we don't even have texts that antedate the 9th or 10th century BC. And that's the early Iron Age. According to Colston, though, we might have something that dates before that, but he does express doubt and concern over that. That's the problem. And he gets the evolution of the scripts wrong. I honestly do. These are my concluding thoughts, though. Again, this is an early alphabetic script. I'm going to stop here because we're approaching the hour mark again. But he's clearly there was so much there. This is an early alphabetic script from the second millennium. Early second millennium, this one, Sinai 361 in particular. And the previous one is definitely second millennium, which is a little later. It's 300 years, I think. I think he's got the dates correct. I'm not sure, but I want to say he's got the dates correct on these. 1446 BC and 17 in the 18th century for the other one. It seems to fit the early alphabetic inscriptions as they are. But to superimpose the Hebrew language on this early alphabetic script is sheer folly. Sheer folly here. Considering there were probably more than 22 letters, as Colstein seems to argue, when you get down to the 11th century. You have 22 letters by then. He seems to think that there are only 22 letters in this script on Sinai 361, when there could have been more with this early alphabetic script. So, those are my thoughts on this. And incidentally, now that I'm thinking about it, when I said I'm no expert and everything, I meant to say I'm not an epigrapher. So, I'm not an epigrapher. But this is so far in left field, this kind of thinking on these early alphabetic inscriptions. It's crazy. It's crazy. So, anyway, if you guys like this sort of content, please hit the like button and don't forget to hit subscribe. Next week, hopefully next week, I will conclude this series and then we can move on. We will conclude this. And on a final note, I actually was, you'll see me, if you go to a YouTuber called What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You, I was interviewed by him earlier this week. And he should upload those videos in the coming weeks. Until then, please go watch him and subscribe to him if you haven't. He has excellent content. And I will see you guys in the next video.